almost into February.
Thought I forgot.
Almost into February. Let's introduce the subcommittee, and do we have a form? 1, 2, 3, 4. We got a form?
Good.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start introductions?
If you're in.
Okay, I'm Eric Edelman, member of the subcommittee and also the chairman of the Carmel Mountain Ranch Community Planning Group.
I'm Kurt Carlson, homeowner for a long time.
Rick Smith, Sabre Springs resident and chairman of this subcommittee.
Mark Clark, resident in Walden.
Michelle Mullen, homeowner.
Rich Krejci, I'm a homeowner and I'm also part of the full council.
And that means we have a quorum. So, anyone want to volunteer to take notes on? Okay.
I got it.
And approval of the agenda of, do I hear a motion for approval of the agenda? Second?
Second.
All in favor? First thing, I'm going to jump down to item number 5. As you can see on the agenda, that's a placeholder in case any documentation was returned by the city. None has been returned yet, so do I hear a motion to continue that to the next meeting?
Make a motion to continue that to the next meeting on number 5.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh. Now, it may or may not be at the next meeting, but have to have it on the agenda. And if it were to come in, the point after I sent the agenda out, we actually probably couldn't discuss it due to Brown Act requirements. So you'll see that not there until such time that we have paperwork back. So, sorry for to make sure kind of that little stuff. My intention here is to have the committee discuss, because we haven't had much time to discuss the proposal, and I would like to do it in a fashion running down hole by hole or building area by building area if you prefer, where we can discuss issues of that the planning commission had mentioned, including open space, parks and recreation, buffers, byways, that sort of thing. Hopefully everyone is able to print it. I think print it, I don't have a big section, so. Is that okay with everybody? No? Let's start off with all of the according to the printout from the PDF from New Urban West. Oh, one other thing. Just to let everyone know, before we go ahead, let everyone know, of course, we're all getting recorded. I would like to ask, however, that when you do post this on YouTube or whatever,
You do.
post the entire 1.5 hours, no editing, whatnot, so we get all context. I noticed in your one of the postings from our last community group meeting, it sort of shrunk down to an hour.
Okay.
That way we get all the context, side comments, whatever happens. I think that's more useful as a record. Thank you. Okay. Hole number 1, townhomes, 2 to 3 story, 66 units. Calls for a discovery play area, passive seating, garden trail, and it has access off, not Chippingham and not Seabridge. What's between Chippingham and Seabridge? Okay.
No,
I mean,
nothing.
I think it's Winterfest.
Yes.
I'm from Sabre Springs, sorry folks, I don't know all your streets. I referenced it by, I mean, all these holes are going to have really, not holes, but building areas, are going to have really difficult access on the current street. Does Eric, I mean,
Yeah, I'm wondering how, I mean, are we just going to have, like, and it's probably a question for New Urban West, but how we're gonna access, how people are gonna access these.
Question for whoever wants and the planning commission.
So I don't know if we wanna take those.
Not yet. The whole one, we have access issues. It says 2 to 3 story townhomes. So my question would be ADA compatible units.
Got a better
Yeah, this is straight out of the, that's straight out of the.
CMR Meeting.
I printed up a couple for them.
The presentation that we're referencing is just what's on New Urban West.
Yeah, exactly.
If you go to cmrvision.com, this presentation that we're referencing is there. So anybody and everybody that wanted to can follow right along. And we're,
Do you want me to try to find it and pull it up?
Yeah, pull it up.
I don't have internet, but I think I can find which one you're talking about. Oh, yeah, I guess I can use hotspots. You know, technology.
A couple of amenities, looks like walking trail, looks like a park there.
Right.
So one of the questions I have is it clear yet who's building and maintaining the parks? Or we just not?
That's what we get down to finance.
Okay.
That's what we get down to finance, because around each one of these holes, are there going to be individual complexes? Say their townhomes are going to be part of, I don't get the name quick, Trails condominiums. Each hole, or are they going to have amenities in? Are they going to just be managing around their building site, or are
Right, and then
there multiple building sites combined into an HOA?
Well, they're gonna be definitely a separate HOA and a current HOA.
Correct.
And then the other thing you have to think about is the people that are gonna be paying their HOA dues that might be maintaining these areas. I think it'd be cool, me bringing my kids from Walden over to walk on the trail down to their park.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely got that. And then you also have, currently, there's the CMR Maintenance Assessment District, which each homeowner pays on their tax bill, slightly under $34 a year. Condos are less. So are these folks going to go into the existing Maintenance Assessment District, or are you going to form your own Maintenance Assessment District for all the new construction? Which would mean that would not be money into the other maintenance assessment district, but looking at the roster of all the parcels, it appears golf course ownership places remarkably little money into the maintenance assessment district. It's not listed under one parcel in the listing, so I may have missed some, but it's almost like each hole is a different parcel for the purposes of assessing the maintenance assessment fee. It's supposed to cost them $16,000. So, but overall, they appear to pay remarkably little, so that will generate a lot of money for the maintenance assessment district based on those rates that current owners pay, but the rates are based on the actual cost of maintaining the land, so who knows how much it costs to maintain this land. It's okay, it's still looking, okay.
So what I had a comment about, if you go through it, and what's really irritating is that, you know, it's like this whole thing with the city is throwing out the Carmel Mountain Ranch design guidelines. Because in our guidelines, it talks about throughout everything, that by the way was, you know, headlined by Kathy Reiser from the group that's, you know, running the New Urban West. It was all about following the topography of our community. Our community is a rolling terrain community. And it talks in this document, it talks about matching the topography. It doesn't talk about, you know, having a variety of housing types and sizes. It's talking about being respectful of the views from each and every one of the homes, protecting view sheds, you know, maintaining, you know, a consistent design. It's talking about specifics in architecture design. It's talking about making sure that the communities aren't, poor design looks between home developments. I think that's the thing that kind of bothers me. Another thing that bothers me is that the lack of respect for the open space. Already, we're losing a lot of open space. The density that they're proposing, going from 4,900 units dwelling units that we have in Carmel Mountain Ranch now, 4,995, and increasing it with 1,200 goes up to about 32%, up to 6,500 dwelling units on only 110 acres of the 175 acres of the golf course. So that's 12 of the 18 holes. And this has been talked about before, if anybody missed it, but it has been brought up. So increasing the density by 32% takes away our open space by 32%. So that's a big deal. It's 347 acres of open space that we supposedly have right now. And we already, the city has agreed that we are already under our designated park space. So we're going from 347 acres to 237 acres. That's a big chunk of land. And I think everybody needs to understand that. The homes, the densities that they're building these homes, and I'm not really talking about just whole one, I'm talking about maybe like on the top floor part. In our community thing, it talks about, ridge lines. And so they're building the maximum amount of their units on our ridge line of our community. And supposedly this master plan is supposed to protect. It's supposed to say that, hey, you're going to maintain design continuity with the topography and making sure that the community is, it's just ridiculous. Is anybody here during the weekends and seeing how crowded it is?
Yep.
I just don't get it. I don't understand. I'll have to stop right now because I've got more to say.
So that's a copy of the community plan that you have there?
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing too is that, from what I understand, my way of understanding what all the workshops and all the meetings that we had with New Urban West, they talked about open space and parks and trails, and my understanding is what I'm hearing is that there's no parks in the final proposal. It's only trails. It's only trails, okay? And we only have really two major parks. And we talked about it ad nauseum in our meetings about we need parks and equity in any of these developments. We want to have open space between these developments. And they're clustering everything up together. They're building basically walls between our community. The golf course was a visual amenity to create buffer space between the housing units and the different developments. That was the main idea of the master plan. And they're just totally throwing this, out the window.
The parks thing is something that came up at the full meeting last month. And do we want to give New Urban West a chance to address that specific question? Because, that seems like a big issue.
Let's wait on that for a
Okay,
minute.
all right.
I think we'll have more than one question.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on the topography?
Sure.
Because in my opinion, it's really evidenced in where Jefferson is placed. It's placed low, it's placed back, it's placed at the base of the hill. And that's the only four-story building currently in our community. And it's not obtrusive because of the placement. The proposed four-story building at the top of the ridge is 9 feet. So you're placing it in the highest point. It's not precedent. Precedent doesn't fit the precedent of our current.
The zoning areas for that central area and the development is low, medium, which is light density, single family homes, and then Jefferson and those homes are the next density. They're like the high density. I can't find the master plan. So it's we're just basically shoving it into where all the homes are.
Planning area number 2, once again, ingress, egress, how are you going to get in there? It's an awfully narrow fairway. All the fairways are extremely narrow. That'll be an issue along with, once again, 2, 3-story townhomes, ADA access, management of the open space, the trails. This one has all offering amenities there. 3 and 4 are the easiest, but also then they do have difficulties because they're Chikorita Creek, which is flood control and open space. So the plan calls for native vegetation and whatnot, but then you get to the issue of who's going to maintain it? Is it going to be HOA maintenance? Is it going to be maintenance assessment district maintenance? Someone's going to have to maintain it. You know, and so it would be a separate, presumably it would go into a separate maintenance assessment district from the existing branch assessment district. So it'd be part of CMR MAD 2, I guess, would be for the lack of another term. But someone has to maintain that open space. And then you go from 3 and 4 to 5 and 6. 5, of course, abuts the recreation center. It calls for 3 stories, garden walk-up, 78 units.
The cash register will be closed in about 10 minutes. If you need to pay any fees, cash or check, please do so now. The library closes at 8 o'clock.
If you want to edit that out.
This is the area where the, like, below the orange circle, that's where the proposal is for that skyrocket.
Right, exactly, we get
So you got this.
exactly. So you got calling for 3-story garden walk-ups here, once again, ADA access and all that. And then it's next to the park. Where the heck you're gonna get access to this, because you've got 2 driveways right next to it, 3 actually if you count the parking structure for the proposed apartment building. And then there'd be another access point somewhere to the whole 6 across the street, so. And then, of course, you also have the tunnel underneath the street there, that you, if you're gonna keep the tunnel, otherwise it'd be a good location for a European-style traffic circle, but I don't think that would work. And you're gonna have, next to these whole 6, of course, the proposed apartment building on top of the parking structure, driveway, couple parking lines. Depends how far down you go. And then you've got a pretty wicked slope there. And if anything, I mean, except for it has a slight slope, I would think hole number 5 would be a perfect addition to the park space.
So on hole number 5, you know, where they have the garden walk-ups, you know, and that being right next to the rec center,
Right,
it actually would be a perfect place to expand a park.
exactly.
It would really make more sense to utilize that area for a park because it's right next to the rec center. We've got some space over there on the side. If you're gonna really, you know, practice what you preach and all the workshops that we've had, that would be a place to put a park. To me, that seems like a little bit makes more sense. To put housing right in that area doesn't make sense at all. And then, you know, going back to holes 4 and 5, those are just really environmental areas.
Right.
So that's no skin off their nose. They were never gonna touch that.
No,
area.
they could.
That's
It's
not-
flood control area. But it does have to be maintained. Eric, any comments you want to?
I mean, that's, pretty much covers it, I think, as far as.
Because, I mean, in the plan as proposed, which is what we're talking about, the plan is proposed, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
Is, there also isn't a basketball court, tennis court, pickleball court, bocce ball court, there's no active, there's no soccer field, softball field, you name your field. Okay, maybe not polo field,
Right.
but, there are all these little pocket parks, which are fine and dandy, but if you're gonna put in 1,000 units, and they have 2 adults, 2.5 kids, and a dog or a cat or a bird, you're gonna need outdoor facilities, you're gonna need parks and recreation. We know both Sabre Springs and Carmel Ranch are underparked, and when it's Little League season or soccer season conflict, I'm glad I don't do the scheduling.
The planning commission asked and told them to set the bar high and to do something unique and different. And to be honest, everything that I've seen and heard is like way below the bar and hasn't done anything. This is a great opportunity to expand the recreational trends that are out there, the ones that you just mentioned about pickleball. I mean, and then maybe some hardcore sports. It's a good opportunity to do that. Even the skate park. I mean, just something that's for the kids that, you know, it would be something that it's being done right now. We're seeing it in all our parks in the city of San Diego.
Then we move on to planning area 7, which is a no build and calls for passive seating area and gathering spaces and walking trail.
Wait, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. 7 is a no build,
Yeah. Hole number 7, planning area 7.
and why is that again?
It's really narrow,
There's no access.
and there's no street access,
There's no street access.
unless,
So what was built there?
it calls for park and walking trail and,
Gathering spaces, picnic areas, open lawn, and a vineyard.
but whatever it is, it would be something that you walk to, because there's no parking also. Especially if you're schlepping your picnic basket.
Amphitheater.
Anything from this side of the table? Okay.
So one of my concerns that I brought up in December, and it's not just for this area, it's all the kind of contiguous areas that are being built on, is I see them, like, after any development is done, I see them as prime targets for future development if they're not turned into parks or something. It kind of prevents them from being built, you know.
In theory, when this goes before the planning commission, the larger group could request that, say, hole number 7 be declared permanent open space. And once it's done that, or designated open space, and once it's done that, can't build it.
There's several holding areas that are
Yeah, I was
big, wide
just,
areas.
you brought up this one, so I was using this since the end.
Not right
Just
now.
hang on, let us finish our discussion, and then we'll get to the, then we'll get to the public comment. Jonathan, you asked something.
Just want to make sure everybody signed up.
Yeah. Initial site design, planning area number 8. Once again, I guess it has access off Shoal Creek at one end, 2 to 3 stories, 98 units, but looks like might be able to build 1 lane in, 2 lanes in, 2 lane, you know, very narrow access. It calls for the passive seating, active trail. Oh, the other thing is, if you were to build 98 units there, are the condo or apartment complexes are they going to have their own recreation areas, weight rooms, swimming pools, whatever, built into that? So that would eat into some of the acreage that you would be doing to homes if other stuff was.
I'm taking notes, so we'll support it.
Yeah, if you took, okay, so that each hole would have, if it was a separate complex, would have its own, if you will, in-house recreation areas.
One question on this slide, talking about 2 or 3 stories, 98 units. Is that going to be 98 units potentially in 2 stories? That's an awful.
It is, absolutely.
Drinking.
It's all.
Absolutely. Okay, planning area number 9 is 300 units, 3-story garden walk-ups, Once again, I'm not quite sure, I guess you access over Carmel Ridge Road, that's the clubhouse. Right?
This is the
Right,
top
that's
of
the
it.
Yeah, that's the biggest parcel there. That's the clubhouse area.
I mean, to me, this is what I was talking about, this is the highest point in the golf course for the community, and it is a ridge line, and therefore it really needs to be protected. There's a lot of views that are going in and around this area, so putting 3 stories is absolutely ridiculous, and it does not match the housing types that we have in our community already. So it's really just kind of just saying, you know, throwing the finger at us all and just saying, I'm putting this development here because I'm gonna make my $1 billion and this is where it's gonna go. And there's so many opportunities to break this up and make it nicer. And, you know, just throwing it all in there to me is really a joke. And goes against everything that we've said at every meeting with them. At all 18 meetings, you know, we have said certain things and those things were totally ignored.
Just the traffic alone. I mean, there's, you know, Seal Road in, Seal Road out. It is, yeah.
Yeah. The access like this, awkward, that's where
The surrounding streets.
Okay, then we have planning area 10 and 11, which also has access issues. A lot of units, 200 units on 2 pools, 3 stories, garden walk. Jonathan, what's the difference between a garden walk up and a town?
I think with your permission, Rick, I'd like to kind of answer all the questions that are received,
Okay.
conclude your discussion, and then I can go one by one and try and answer all the questions to the best.
You got it, no problem. And
I have a question about this. It looks like this whole is edited from the original. It looks like more green space has been put back than originally the development space was larger. If you could speak to that, if that is what you're proposing, why, what changes?
okay, access issues, of course. Then we come to planning areas number 12 and 13.
But, you know, that last hole though, I think at 10, 11, there really needs to be some green space there. I mean, this is like totally ignoring it. Again, we need equity in all these new areas because they had green space before. So green space should be a theme on every single hole where development happens. And I'm not talking just trails. I mean, there needs to be a neighborhood park or it's a community park. I mean, there needs to be areas for children to play, be able to, for people to go sit and walk, take advantage of the views. Because there are incredible.
And again, it's not built probably to scale, but it's been built like that. It's just a solid, long, right, that it should be broken up a little.
Yeah, that was brought up in one where there could be multiple buildings kind of offset so you can see through. You want kind of just a big, this looks like, you know, a giant wall.
And so it's not gonna be a giant wall, it would be good to know, right? 'Cause it looks like it's gonna be.
And the thing that kind of bugs me the most is that, you know, this 3-story thing in our community, it's like also beefing up the number of units. In other words, they're trying to get as much as they can up front because they can't go up, right? When you ask for something. You can go down, but you can't go back up. So they're asking for everything that they can get. And that's not right. That's not smart development. That's just like, it's stupid development. It's like, just like, you know, are they saying that, well, we'll probably end up doing 2 stories here, but, you know, we're gonna ask for 3 anyway. I mean, I don't get that. I just do not understand that.
We moved to 12 and 13, which just appear to be open space with parks,
So
seated areas, nature trail parks. But once again, how do you get public access, Joe?
there is an area that they say they want to build, that little,
On a little triangle.
long triangle.
Okay, excuse me. I know this is- you're right.
How many units in there?
Jonathan, the potential for that little triangle is,
I'll write it down.
Okay,
So we'll just go through
We'll,
it.
we'll address that.
okay, thank you. Then 14, once again, being long and narrow, is just open space, shaded seating areas, dog park. Once again, as a public amenity, how do you get access to it? Yes. And then 15 and 16, almost done for my presentation, calls for senior flats of 3 to 4 story, 123 units. My question is, would be twofold. When you say senior flats, is that like in one of the age-restricted developments in Rancho Bernardo, 55 and older, or is it a facility like Belmont Village or Sunset Senior Living that we have two of them at Cedar Springs? I mean, we have one each, but we have two senior living facilities. Obviously, that parcel there has pretty good access off of Highland Ranch, I think it is. But also, it's a,
I would disagree in that, you know, you have a signal on Eastbourne Road,
that is true.
and then you have a major community going into the heritage. So you're really, and I mean, I honestly don't understand the access for that area right there.
Go ahead.
Putting a road in between there it's only gonna be, you know, right turn in, right turn out.
Correct.
And I just, you know,
Yeah, that would be true.
and 4 stories, 3 to 4 stories just is ridiculous. Because all those are 2-story homes on both sides.
And seniors do have cars, so they would require parking for their cars.
And this is more than a half a mile from the transit center.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that might be a perfect location for a soccer field, since it's relatively close to highway.
Perfect.
This is really the worst
Yeah.
example of a really tall building with a minimal setback
Yeah.
on houses that, you know, they're like right in the backyard of houses and 4 stories tall, minimal setback.
Want the shade or sunset, or sunrise or sunset for a lot of lots. Okay, then we go to 17 and 18. Once again, senior flats, 3 to 4 stories, 120 units. Interesting egress issues, because it's in the middle of the housing complex, and of course it's right out here, I guess. So how are you going to get access to that?
I don't know what thing you mumbled again.
Oh,
People put helicopters there.
let's stay away from helicopters these days. And then you also have the same amenities of an active trail, overlook, community gardens, things along those lines. But how are you going to make those community facilities accessible to the entire community?
If I remember right, this one was edited, so this is not what was on the original resolution.
Where's the access coming from on that one?
I haven't gotten to it. So we'll answer it. I took notes throughout every question and we're gonna go through it.
Okay, and just as a comment,
Unless you take out
that
someone's
also
house.
applies on that property. So 4 stories, the houses that are on either side, you're gonna look out your window into a wall of apartments. Just the same. Full wall.
Okay, hang on, folks.
In a nutshell.
So I think I got all my points in.
Michelle? For now? Okay, we'll be talking more. Jonathan, you want to respond now to the access, all the issues we raised, and then we'll go to public comment.
So, the two overarching were parks and explaining how development has the fringe line of what that means, and then we'll go through it by
Jonathan, don't keep it quick on this.
Sure, there's a lot there. I'll do my best.
We got a lot of people on the list.
Sure, I know we do. Hey, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jonathan Frankel with Neighborhood West. Happy New New Year to you. It's a great pleasure to be here. We appreciate the opportunity to come back and address you to talk about the plans and answer your questions tonight. So there was a lot there. That was really helpful feedback. I'll do my best to answer as many questions as I can, of course, from the board and from any member of the public. So the first question I think was the one that we get the most, and there was some communication sent out to the community regarding parks. And I want to explain how the parks design process works in the city of San Diego and as to why the park areas are not yet shown on the plan. Firstly, though, I'd like to just give you a quick background about what we've submitted to the city of San Diego and when the plans will be available for distribution to the community planning group, which is Eric's board. You can come look at them. So in the city of San Diego, they have what is called a preliminary review process, which means that any applicant submitting an application for development needs to come in with something preliminary, and they say, hey, this is a completeness review. I want to make sure that you're submitting all the required plans, that it meets all the baseline requirements for development. So that's a whole bunch of analysis on things like traffic, on other issues. So that's what we initially submitted. A preliminary initial application will not have a fully designed park system in it. So that's why you don't see it there. That doesn't mean at all that we're not including it. Correct. So we fully recognize, and the city requires legally us to provide parks. It's going to be a critical element of the plan. But when you see a preliminary plan, it's not yet complete. So oftentimes there's not going to be details there that are going to be fully fleshed out as we move through the process with the city.
Why not?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you include it?
Because what the city does, the way the city process works is you submit a series of preliminary plans. They check a bunch of boxes to make sure that it's complete. Then they calculate the required amount of park acreage. So they say, this is our expectation for the amount of acres of parkland that you have to provide as a project. And then we take that and then we say, okay, this is where we think it best fits. We resubmit it to the city, they give us comments, we make revisions. We resubmit it again, they give us comments, we make revisions, so on and so forth. So it's not going to be until we get an EIR, which is the environmental impact study, kind of fully out for public review, that you're going to have a plan that's not subject to change. So of course you're welcome to look at the plans. We encourage you to do so, but please know that any plan you see is highly likely to change as we move through the process with the city. So that's just the way development works, that's the way plan check reviews work, and that's certainly how it works in the city of San Diego. Yes?
So I have a comment. So even on your plan that has the parks in it, the parks are small pocket parks and toddler parks. So I heard loud and clear the community asking for sports parks and more middle and older age kid play areas, organized play areas, and I don't see that anywhere.
Sure. So we've identified, it's a good point. So we've identified right now about 10 acres that we think would work for actual public park facilities. So I'll talk about maintenance in a second. I know that was another key kind of component of this. But we've identified about 10 acres. So we're going to be working with the city to refine that proposal. The city has a whole guide for, Kurt knows this better than anybody, for the type of park. So neighborhood park is a defined term in the city. It means a particular thing, right? And that may include ball fields and other things. They have pocket parks and other kind of park characteristics that they want included. So that's another thing that they're going to be talking to us about. But again, there absolutely will be parks in the project. We've identified about more or less 10 acres of area. It could include some of those active recreational amenities that you said, Michelle. It could include a whole variety of things. We got a lot of feedback during our workshops about what we like, what the community is interested in seeing. And so we try and meld that with what the city, what their standards are and what their requirements are.
That's not enough. 10 acres is nothing.
As opposed
Yes.
to
10
how much
acres
we're
is
building.
nothing.
10 acres of
We
those.
need at least twice that.
Okay. Understood. So with respect to open space, so parks fit into the overall open space system. So the actual building area of the project is about 30%. So we're actually building housing on about 30% of the property. The 164 acres, we're actually constructing houses on about 30% of that. 70% is parkland, is areas we're not building on, is the buffer area in between new and existing homes, the 50-foot minimums in between any new and existing residents. So that's what you see depicted here. Of course, the beige areas being the actual residential development.
I really wish that you wouldn't refer to buffer areas as park space. It's really open space. Park space is more attuned to active recreation. I mean, a trail system or a safe cart path is not a park.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
It's misleading.
Yeah, we're not, the open space system does include the parks. The buffers are completely separate land use. They're designated completely separately on the map. We are not taking any credit for the buffer areas as provision of parks. You're completely right, it's completely separate.
We're also gonna have car parking and other driveways in those open areas in the park.
Yeah, so, it's a great question. So with respect to these open space areas that you see that could potentially accommodate parks, obviously there may be parking for people visiting the park, but other than that, no. The actual buffer areas, the first 15 feet of that will be landscape, guaranteed landscape area, and then we're working with the city on determining how much potential parking would be in the area. We think it's going to be less than 50% of that area in total that could be used potentially for parking. But what we want to make sure, and somebody mentioned this before, is that there's no building of any kind in that area. We're recording a building restricted easement on that area to make sure that there wouldn't be any building of any type, and that parking would be generally limited in those areas. It's not going to be a majority of parking.
Could you talk about the zoning of the development paths versus?
Sure. So as most of you know, the golf course has an existing zoning. Excuse me, I'll be right there. I'll get to you, don't worry. And so we are actually not proposing to change the zoning in the buffer areas in the open space. So if you like the AR11 zoning, we're not proposing any changes to those areas, meaning even if somebody wanted to build, they would need to go through another full zone change process. In addition to that, in addition to not changing the zoning of the buffers, we're also going to record a building restricted easement, as I just mentioned here. So there is absolutely no intent. I understand it's a very reasonable concern. Well, what about a second bite at the apple? These areas that are left open, you're going to come back, you're going to rezone them and come back in. That's precisely why we decided to tell the city asked us, they said, well, why would you retain an agricultural zone, right? This is a generally suburban and urbanized area. There's not likely to be commercial agriculture use here. And we said we want to make sure the community understands that we do not propose any housing in these areas. And so for that reason, we're going to leave the existing zoning in place on those parcels.
The next theme is.
I'm going to move through. So,
the next thing was explaining how the
We'll get to the public comment.
Yeah, sure. Well, we gotta explain
It says
that.
all housing.
right, yeah, so let's talk about the development area, within the development
Can you
area.
pause 1 second?
Sure.
Folks who have their hand,
Jonathan, about
there's
10
time
minutes
allotted.
more, and then
It's just that we're on top of
start
that.
public comment.
I realize that, but if we allow your question, then we have to allow every other person who raises their hand to ask a question, and we get way off track, and then the meeting goes haywire. So must maintain at least a semblance of order. Go ahead. Sorry.
So within each development area, so when we're talking about the park space and the trail is about 6 miles, park is about 10 acres plus or minus that we've identified. Those areas are publicly accessible and we record public access easements over them. So that's for the entire community to enjoy. That's not the only recreation that is provided. So when you see a development area like this, the city has standards for private recreation areas. So the question was, are they going to have a pool and tot lots and other facility? The answer is absolutely yes. So when you see a big, long development area like this, the city requires a certain amount of that to be open space. So anybody that comes in, when we build this, we're going to have to meet both the public open space requirements that we've committed to the community and private recreation requirements. So don't think just because you see a big long area that it's all development or a big long wall of building. That's not the case. So with respect to the orientation and Kurt's comments about orientation of buildings, Kurt, I don't know if you've had a chance to read our design guidelines that we produced for the project.
No.
So I would encourage you, when they're available, to do that. And so for exactly the reasons Kurt mentions about topography, about form, building massing and the height, how do you employ best practices to reduce visual impacts? I'm not going to stand up here and say that it's not a major change to have a 3-story building in your backyard. It is. We fully recognize that, and I appreciate that.
That's good.
At the same time, there are things that you can do with the topography, with your grading design, with how you're stepping buildings back from the street, from the public right-of-way, for example, that can lessen that impact. And we've incorporated a lot of those features, worked very closely with our architect to incorporate those features into a set of guidelines that is going to govern the design. on this project. So those aren't yet available. So, reaching conclusions about the design, I would just encourage you and appreciate if you would take time to read those design guidelines and give us your feedback. It may not be sufficient, but I think that we did really work to try and incorporate a lot of design best practices in order to minimize visual impacts in that way.
One question was explaining the different housing types.
Sure. And there was a question about 2- and 3-story townhomes. So in a typical 2-story townhome, it's just like generally, it obviously shares a wall, 1 or 2 walls, but you have a garage, and then you've got your first floor living area off the garage, and the second floor would be most often an entrance space. In a 3-story townhouse, you typically have the garage on the first floor, the living space on the second floor, and bedrooms on the third floor. So that's how generally those are laid out. There's a lot of different layouts. Folks do it different ways, and there's options. Garden walk-up just signals that there's no elevator. These aren't elevator-served buildings. And these are very, very typical, very similar to anybody that lives in an apartment here in Carmel Mountain Ranch, that existing about the 25% of the units in the community today that are apartments. It's exactly the same as those units. They're just not elevator served. Senior buildings are elevator served. And that's the primary difference between, just from a building typology, that's the primary difference between the two.
And then just clarify the age restricted.
Yeah, so age restricted, this is not assisted living. These are active adult communities. So this is, you have to be over 55, but they're not offering congregate care, they're not offering assisted living, there's no memory care there. These are not nursing facilities.
You can also do a 2-story garage and then living area on top of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of different...
Not a 3rd story.
Yeah, there's a lot of different permutations. There's a lot of different permutations of floor plans. Kurt is absolutely right about that. I have a list. Forgive me for looking at my phone. I normally wouldn't do this, but there's a lot of questions that I want to make sure. So maintenance. That was another big issue. Who will maintain this? So there are a variety of options, and right now we think it will be a mixture of 3 potential entities. Firstly, a master HOA. And what would the master HOA? And this would be a new HOA. This would not be included in the existing Carmel Mountain Ranch master HOA. This would be a master association that just covers the new development. And they would maintain these larger areas here, obviously the naturalized open space here, and they would maintain all of the publicly accessible parks. So the primary areas where the holes, where we're not developing on those units, those areas, that would be the responsibility of the new master HOA. Existing residents would not contribute to a new master HOA. The second entity that could be responsible for maintenance is a sub-association, and we intend to have sub-associations on those holes where you have homes that are for sale townhomes. So where you see townhomes, they're likely to have a sub-association. If any of you live in a townhome, I have a sub-association where I live. It's a fairly typical structure. And so those would be units 1, 2, and 8. And they would have a sub-association. So any recreational amenities, anything kind of adjacent in and around those units, the sub-association would be responsible for maintaining that area most proximate, most adjacent to their residential units. Now, thirdly, we know that there is an existing maintenance assessment district here, of which the golf course is currently a part. We have asked the city if they would be interested in having the new homes as part of the existing maintenance assessment district. Now, what at least theoretically that would do is, if the scope of work stayed the same, that maintenance district is pretty limited in what it maintains. It's not a huge amount of space. It's a lot of parkways and medians and kind of landscape areas throughout the community. So there's the possibility that adding new units in there actually reduces the cost, adds a lot of revenue, and you're not adding any new maintenance areas, so you're actually reducing the cost for existing homeowners. So we asked them, if the golf course is in the district today, how do you want to handle this? And that's an issue that we have not yet resolved. And so there is going to be a specific process for adding units into the maintenance assessment district. We're not exactly sure what that is yet, how the city will handle that. And so that's something that we're looking at. But the vast majority of the maintenance will be covered by a master HOA and then associated sub-HOAs. Finally, for those units where there will be apartments located, the maintenance of the areas in and around the new units would be handled by the owner of the apartment building. So that's very typical that all the amenities kind of in and around adjacent to the new development would be handled and would be maintained by the company that ultimately owns the apartment.
Rick, would you like us to go through whole by whole and address access?
No, we're gonna move to public.
So generally, if I could just make one comment about access, Rick, if I could, because that was the other final issue. So the city evaluates access in a number of ways. The city has numerous standards for safety and how you access holes. One is sight distance. When you're coming out of a private driveway, is it safe? Can you see oncoming traffic? 2 is intersection spacing. So how far apart are the intersections from one another, and does that create safety hazards? So both of those criteria, we actually have to produce a set of plans that shows how we're going to meet those city standards. So understandably, safety is a concern at these private drives that we're proposing, and the city is going to make sure that we're meeting their criteria, both for sight distance safety and for intersection safety. I also want to mention in that regard, there's queuing analysis done there. So I think an understandable concern is that cars would back up and potentially create hazards in the existing street. So what the city requires us to do is analyze the expected queue at each driveway. So we can make sure that we're not causing some huge long stack of cars that then backs up onto a main road that's then causing other traffic problems.
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll move to public comment now. As always, try to, you'll hear the ducks. And I'm just gonna go down the list. If someone asks your question, please just skip and go ahead. Harold Klotz.
Yes, Jonathan? The trail access points seem to be exactly the same that they were under the current situation at the car pass entry and exit. That doesn't really improve any kind of connectivity, because you get your walk, it's great for long walks with your dog, but it doesn't do anything for walkability. The first thing that comes to mind is the senior flats. Doesn't appear to be any new access point out by foot that someone from there could go directly up to, right through the library up to the shopping center. And there's lots of other situations where nothing seems to be any better than it used to be. Could you address that?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that opinion. Respectfully, we disagree. And the reason why is because instead of having to pay $50, $60, or $70 to walk on a path, to access a path that does in fact connect throughout the entirety of the community, now that's going to be a publicly accessible amenity. So, that adaptive reuse of the trail system, reusing it in that way, is taking something that's existing, instead of ripping up all that concrete, we want to repurpose it. Now, the access points and how you get to the commercial areas in the library, for example, that's something that we're refining the kind of alignment of that, and thinking about connectivity is really important. And another thing that we're thinking about is, we know that this neighborhood has what we in the planning world call a last mile problem, which is that even if you get to the transit center, right, how are you getting your last mile to the grocery store or somewhere else? If you're coming home from work, say, and you're fortunate enough to be able to take the bus downtown, or you're able to take the bus here, and you want to get to the business park. And so we're thinking about how do you create that connectivity and utilize these trails, the existing cart path, to actually facilitate a dedicated pedestrian space and bicycle space that's actually free from car conflict, right? So these are dedicated areas that are not adjacent to streets. So we're not asking our bicycles and pedestrians to walk or ride their bikes adjacent to cars whizzing by at 40 or 50 miles an hour. And so in that way, we think it can be a really powerful tool in taking something that's already there and allowing people that first to access it, and second, actually ride and walk with the safety knowing that they're not potentially having a car veer into them, into their lane or into their space.
Okay, thank you. Next, Larry?
I want to defer my 3 minutes. Troy? Troy?
Okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to start by saying that we attended, a group of us, I think many in the community, attended the HOA meeting this past week. The HOA has been suspiciously absent from this process, and a lot of people have a concern about that. And we at Carmel Mountain United, my name is Troy Dong, I'm with Carmel Mountain United, I founded the organization, and I'm speaking on behalf of Carmel Mountain United. And on November 25th, the president of the board, Gary Brizard, sent a letter. I think many of you have probably seen that letter. If you have not, it was refreshing for some of us here to say that we were pleased when they said we were writing to inform you that the HOA vehemently opposes the type, style, and density of development that New Urban West is proposing on the old golf course property. The HOA plans, with your support, to vigorously oppose the development that New Urban West is proposing. Understand, I don't have anything to do with the HOA, I'm just reporting, and I think it's important for all of us to make sure that we keep an eye on the HOA. I'm cautiously optimistic. They have hired a law firm. They have a lot of resources, financial resources. They bill 4,000 people a month. So we ask that maybe they consider raising HOA dues to help protect the interest of the community. They are going to consider that. And I think it's also important the community recognizes there is a process in place on their website for electing delegates. I would encourage all of you to consider becoming involved as a delegate and/or an HOA board member. It's my belief HOAs should represent the community, and there has been some concern that that has not been happening. And I'm not suggesting that they won't do that going forward. They have requested these plans, and they hire a lawyer to look at those plans. But I think it's important that we all keep a close eye on the HOA and communicate, and hopefully they'll represent our interests in protecting our community. The second item I wanted to mention, this coming Thursday, and I'm mentioning this as an individual, not representing Carmel Mountain Ranch, but as an individual, I would say ultimately this will be decided by elected officials, a vote of the City Hall. We are going into primary season. There are two candidates that will be hosting a meet and greet this Thursday at the Rec Center, and I would suggest that those of you who are interested attend. Ask those candidates what, are they going to support us? Are they looking at this development as something that generates revenue for the city? And I would encourage you to be very active in the elective process because getting the right people elected to represent our interests is important. Thank you. And we did put an announcement out, and maybe we'll have Larry also do that on next door. But if you're on our communication chain, that email went out yesterday and has all the details, Ken's name, and so forth.
Thank you, Larry. Troy. Anyway. Claudia.
Yeah. In question, not to you, but in question for that, in the paper on Sunday, there was an article about the four people who are running for District 5 City Council, and it explains what their views are, although they cannot say they would support or not support this particular project, because if they did, they would not then be able to vote when they come up if they were elected. So they can tell things that they're concerned about. And what my read was in another meet and greet that I went to was about the schools, the safety of us as far as being able to exit in case of emergency from our communities, and then also the density for the shopping and that area. And then these are people who are representing Penasquitos, Scripps Ranch. So there are many projects going on in our community, District 5 community, that are going to impact every single one of us. And so we need to make sure that these people understand what that is. They live in District 5, that's how this is going to impact us.
Thank you. Excuse my pronunciation. Subhan Bahati.
Yep.
I live on 17, and you are proposing to put a 3 or 4 bedroom story building for senior flats. How are you going to make sure that my view currently, if you put up that large a building, can you make it a 2-story building, or spread it out, or what's the plan? Also, I live in a cul-de-sac, and so there's not a whole lot of traffic going on, and I have small kids who play in the front yard. How are you going to make sure that the traffic, if you build that unit, because it's a 150 or large number of units, the number of cars going through, if they go through my street, how am I going to protect them?
Sure, I'll take the second question first, which was with respect to traffic. So the way the city analyzes traffic in San Diego is they make you quantify the number of cars that you're going to be placing on the road. So for example, if you live on Eastbourne in the cul-de-sac, we're taking access there. They're going to say, if you have seniors living there, how many trips do seniors take a day? Where are they going and where are they coming from? How much existing traffic is on your street? And how much can the street accommodate? How much capacity does the street have to accommodate new cars? And they give each street a letter grade, just like grade school, A, B, C, D, E, F. And they give the street a grade. There's passing grades and failing grades. If you have a failing grade, you need to make improvements. You need to make some upgrade to the road. With a passing grade, it's allowable. So that's how the city handles traffic in the city of San Diego. With respect to views, I mentioned to Kurt that we created a set of design guidelines. Again, I will not pretend for a second that having a 3 or 4-story building in your backyard is not a significant change. We understand that it is. We've worked hard with our architect to create a set of design guidelines that will provide some visual relief. And also the provision of the 50-foot buffer around the perimeter of each one of the units ensures that you don't have a house that is 5 or 10 feet away, right? So if you have your existing neighbor, if you're in your side yard, you're looking at your neighbor that's 10 feet away. So the proposed setback is 5 times the existing setback that exists on the side today for most people in Carmel. So that's how we're doing.
But today I have a 200 feet buffer from my
Sure, in the rear.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Next is Ed Taylor.
I'm still wondering, you've got, okay, this one says senior flats, but you've got other areas, you've got the townhomes. You showed us the different townhomes, garden homes, whatever. And some of them just said apartments. Are the ground floor levels going to be entirely apartments? To garage space? And then you've got 2 or 3 levels of living space on some of these that are not characterized as garden homes or townhomes.
So it's likely a mix. So in a standard 3-story apartment building, you're going to have living space on all 3 floors, meaning you're going to be parking around it.
Okay, behind you. Those are the 3 types, styles that will be built. Is that what you're telling me?
Generally, yeah, these are depictions of the style.
Okay, so there's not going to be, it's just another one that's going to be a monolith of small apartments in one building.
Yeah, we think these are pretty representative of the product type, the type of housing that is likely to be built.
That's not a no.
Likely. I've got to say this isn't going to look like Mission Valley for you. Is it?
Of course. Yes, it is.
Yes. Ah, you're killing me. You're killing me.
Ignore that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your comment.
No, don't ignore it, that's right.
That's right.
This is just, he moved into Mission Valley, Mission Valley didn't move into him.
Jamal Razif.
Yeah, I'm Junaid Rafi. I'm not,
Once
I
you
don't like,
excuse my pronunciation.
that's all right. I don't like to come on Martin, but I'm coming to a meeting from the other side of the freeway, so I'm your neighbor across the freeway. I saw your meeting notice on next door, so I thought I'd go to it and see what's going on with your development here, but also to apprise you of what's going on across the freeway. I think you need to be aware. Right at the intersection of Carmel Mountain Road and PQ Drive, and a little slice of PQ as we call it, about 1,400 new homes are going up as we speak. Okay, and this simply doubles the number of homes that community was built for. It was designed in the 70s as a big residential neighborhood with 1,400 homes, one two-lane road in and out. All of a sudden, with the shutdown of the Carmel Hotel, we are now doubling the number of homes over there. So we have a community group called the PQ Any Action Group, which you may have seen posts from. We are trying to bring some sanity into the process. We realize we cannot stop this. So what our approach has been to try to lower the density, address infrastructure issues, schools, roads, what have you, and more importantly, avoid a fire safety issue. We have one road, two-lane road, that dead ends on the west side. On the east side feeds into Carmel Mountain Road, 2 lanes with almost 2,800 homes times whatever the number of people there are. So we feel this is a paradise type situation just waiting to happen. It's a new reality we're living in California. So I just want in your outreach to your group, politicians, what have you, please be aware that it's not just the problem you have here with overcrowding and infrastructure. What's happening just across the freeway is also very concerning to us. I just wanted to come in and observe and let you know that. Thanks.
Rich Holstrom.
Yeah, I've actually got just 2 questions. On the 50-foot buffer, is that completely going to be devoid of anything, or is that driveways? Is that the back of building access? Is it going to be roads? Is it going to be walking paths, or just greenery?
Yeah, the vast majority of it is greenery and walking path. There may be some limited
What's your
areas.
definition of vast majority?
I can't give you a precise figure, Rich. I'd be happy to look and give you that.
No, what I mean is, do you mean like, you know, is it 51% or 25 feet is going to be?
I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, but I do know that, you know, the intent of creating the buffer was to provide visual relief and to provide green space. So again, that's why we're recording a building restricted easement in there, so you can't build anything in there. There may be some limited areas that are utilized as parking, but the majority of it will be walking trails, landscaped areas, and really serve as that buffer.
The second question is, I want to make sure I understand with all the numbers being thrown around tonight. How many holes are being developed right now as your number, preliminary number? I've heard 9, 10, 11. How many?
So we have 1, 2.
Are you counting or telling me the whole?
I'm counting to make sure that I don't misspeak or be recorded, so the last thing I want to do is be one number off.
I didn't know if I was supposed to keep track of the whole number.
Yeah, so 1, 2, 5, 6, 8, 9 in the clubhouse, 10 and 11,
The Carmel
16
Mountain
and
Ranch
17.
Library will be
So that's 10
closing
and
in
8.
about 20
20,
minutes.
18.
If you have
A little over
items to
half the
check out,
acres?
please do
No,
so
so
now.
again, as a
All internet connections at the train station will be.
actual building area, the areas where we're building new housing is about 30% of the property.
I didn't mean the footprint of the buildings. I mean because that's all being developed in some fashion, whether it be mini parks or whatever. But you're using 10 of the 18 holes to put buildings on.
Correct.
And then the last question, and I brought this up to you a number of times before, have you dealt with the boundary issues yet? Have you found any boundary issues that need to be resolved?
Yeah, we have done some preliminary survey work. And the good news is because this was a relatively recent community, 80s, 90s vintage, there's not a tremendous amount of encroachments that we see. In the event that we do find encroachments, the way that we deal with it is just work directly with the homeowner to try and resolve it. We don't want to have to take anybody to court or do anything drastic. So that's how we generally deal with it.
Yeah, because I think Escondido, if I heard right, and that's just hearsay, there were some significant boundary issues. And that's really what my question is. Obviously, it's 6 inches here or a foot or 2 there doesn't make that much of a difference to anybody. But have you run into any significant boundaries?
We have not to date.
Thank you, Rich. Karen, vote.
Okay, about the buffers, because I was concerned about that too, if they were really a full buffer. So
Sorry, I forgot to stop.
in that buffer. So when somebody's already stressed out having a 3 or 4 story building, the distance of a house in between their backyard and this building, then they could not be looking at like, 30-foot trees or, that you were gonna plant. But it could be like a parking lot, or it could be maybe a parking lot with like a solar roof on top or something like that. Another question, are you gonna have like parking lots with solar roofs that people could be looking over in their buffer? That's one question.
Parking in the buffer area will be limited. I don't have the exact figure in terms of the footage, but one of the things that we do in the design guidelines is make sure that you don't have a huge swath of acres and acres of parking, right? So in that way, I don't want it to be like Mission Hill. One thing I really dislike about it. So certainly it's not good design to create a huge area of parking. So we're working with the city to come up with a figure that there's only going to be X percentage of that area that would even be available for parking. Solar requirements are mandated largely by the state now. So they require that every single unit has solar on it, and they require a certain amount of renewable energy generation based on an anticipated demand associated with the new home. So I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head. So if the city says, hey, you need more here, and the only way to get it given our roof area is to go into a buffer, that's the last place we would want to put it. We would much rather kind of locate it in one of the holes where we're not developing it, cluster it, and, instead of sprawling it out everywhere. But it's not something that we've worked with the city on.
Okay, of the 1,200 proposed units, how many, do you have like a number of apartments for rent? Because it's going to be townhomes that are for sale, no single-family dwellings. Do you know how many like for rent units that you're planning?
Yeah, I can get you the exact number, Karen. I can quickly crunch the numbers after. I don't want to cite an inaccurate number, but right now the majority are apartments for rent.
So you could have out of 1,200 units, you could have like 500, 600 plus units apartment for rent.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I got 2 more quick questions. My quote, this one statement is, you said that it's probably all these new buildings are going to be separate HOA. Most of these units, they might be apartments, but on the townhomes it would be a separate HOA, and then they might have like sub-associations. I feel that would really divide the community, because if this thing gets pushed through, and none of us want to, I would say, there's going to be a lot of resentment about the people that are living on these former fairways. And if they had a separate HOA, I think that would be even more divisive. And I feel, my opinion, it should come under our Carmel Mountain Ranch Association. I don't know if there's any ramifications or whatever, but that's my feeling.
Okay, Karen, the death is smoking.
Got it?
That's it.
That's it. All right.
Hi. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I know the answer of this question, but I want to ask you why you don't have any single-family homes designed for these communities that you're building.
Sure, we had a few choices with respect to design, and we kind of planned a few iterations. One of which was to have bigger homes on a larger number of holes, on a greater area. So if you want to sprawl out, you can have bigger houses on a greater number of holes. What we heard from a lot of people in the community and at the city is we want you to preserve as much open space as we can. This golf course served as open space and served as view protection. So we want you to limit the number of areas that you develop on the property. So in order to do that, to cluster certain areas, certain development in particular areas, those get a little bit more dense. And so that's the kind of net effect of deciding not to develop that many holes. Secondly is those houses tend to be a little bit smaller. They tend to be a little bit more attainable, as you noticed before, say a first-time home buyer, maybe somebody that can't afford a $700,000 or $800,000 house, but maybe could afford a $600,000 condo. One of the things the city has been really focused on in recent years is providing home ownership opportunities for younger folks like myself. So they are thinking about how do we create,
All internet connections at the print stations will be shut down.
So how do you create that type of mix and provide those type of opportunities? And that's something that we also want to achieve.
Okay. First of all, a $600,000 or $700,000 townhome and an $800,000 house will, at the end of the day, will be the same qualification for the loan, because in a townhome you will have $300 to $400 HOA with two HOAs. You know, they're gonna have two HOAs. I'm sure one master HOA and one sub HOA. So when you calculate loans, I know people think 600 or 700, but to buy a $600,000 property in a condo is exactly the same as buying a $700,000 or $800,000 home. So that's the wrong picture that people are, or the city is giving to the people. The second thing I have is I would like to know about hole number 2 and 8. Both those holes, I can see they have one entrance, and if I'm not mistaken, they both come feed through Shoal Creek Drive, correct?
So I believe one is off of Windcrest and one does come off of Shoal Creek.
Yeah. Number 8?
Oh, so sorry, I was talking about 1. 1 and 2, so
Two,
one is
no,
off,
8,
yes,
yeah.
correct.
So Shoal Creek Drive is a one lane each way going up and then parking. And the parking in that street is used for bringing all the apartments, you know, at night they all park there, in the morning they park there. The school buses stop there for middle school and elementary school. Kids in that street, they use that street, many kids to go to school. So I think that will create a very dangerous situation for the residents of Carmel Mountain Ranch who have kids or who use that main Shoal Creek Lane to commute, to go to work and come back, or go to school and come back. And that street feeds through the school. That's the only way you can go from this side to the school. So,
So I'll have to stop there, but we take note of your comment. Jean?
Okay, I'll try to make this quick because I have a lot of things. I'm concerned about the open space. AAA insurance has dropped the insurance of anybody who backs up to open space defined as not landscaped. Okay, and they put you in a high-risk insurance. Other insurance companies that still insure you just charge you a lot more. So I've already been impacted by the fact the golf course closed and it's open space. That's what I have right now. I have big eucalyptus trees dumping all kinds of trash, you know, just kindling on my property that I have to pay someone to come and, you know, blow away. So those are financial impacts from you leaving open space that's not landscaped. So that needs to be landscaped. Also, if it's just open space, where I see that things are open space, where there's people that can access things, I'm seeing trash build up, where things are being thrown over the fence that are not being cleaned up. I'm concerned about problems with vagrancy. So basically, because of the golf course, it is now considered a fire zone. You know, it's low risk, but it's still a fire zone. So there's fire risk. And of course, the safety issue with, I have these giant eucalyptus trees that are looming over my yard that every time the wind blows and they creak, I am afraid to be in my own yard. I'm concerned that, you know, a branch will drop. There are dropped branches there that have not been cleaned up, that are piling up. Okay, there's kindling. I look over at my neighbor's overhead structure for her patio, and I see, she can't see it, but I see all kinds of kindling and debris that has dropped there. Now, to leave this as open space does not resolve that problem. That leaves this fire hazard, higher insurance rates, and all these issues. So the solution is not just, oh, well, we'll just leave it as open space. It needs to be maintained. Okay, the other thing is, you're talking about 15 feet of landscape space. No, it's even for small houses with smaller square footage than mine, AAA requires 30 feet. If you have a larger home, it's going to require about 100 feet of defensible, landscaped, watered, you know, land. And as far as these people being in a separate homeowners association, I'm in Arroyo St. George's. You know, I have my Arroyo St. George's homeowners,
and I also have to pay the $44 for Carmel Mountain. So I don't see this as being any different. They have their own association, but if they're part of Carmel Mountain using our amenities, our schools, our everything, then I think that they also should be part of that. Or else our association has no control over these people, these giant eucalyptus trees, all this stuff that we have no control over. So, and over in Pacific Village, that's that place across the street this gentleman was talking about. That's No Melrose. They've been impacted on their schools. They're starting to really see the impact because no Melrose, because the schools are already there, so we don't have to build anymore. However, the schools are being impacted. You cannot impact a school without reducing the quality of education. And, you know,
Quick clarification, I just want to make, so when we say open space, Gene, we don't mean just leave it as it is in native and provide no maintenance. So we talked a lot about tonight about maintenance of these open space areas. They will be landscaped, irrigated, and maintained. So this is not a completely native. You see the golf course is fallow today. Whatever nature does, nature is going to do. We want to create a mechanism by which we can maintain these areas, create some defensible space, so that these open space areas and the buffers will be actively maintained by the association.
And you guys gonna have any Melrose for your?
Yeah.
Because we paid Melrose to build the infrastructure for.
Let's save that for next time.
Oh.
Is that Rob? Yeah. Could you put up poll number 1?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm concerned. I'm right by the tunnel where it comes out, and I've got 140 feet of backyard, which is facing, looks like a 3-story unit or something. How do you construct these? Where's the road going to be that these people are going to access in and out? Is it going to be in the middle? Or am I going to be looking, if I still live there, am I going to be looking at cars going back and forth from this so-called buffer zone? And is the 50 foot from the house, or is it from the property line?
So the 50 feet is measured from the back of an existing resident's property line, your back fence, if that is on your property line, to any new structure. So if you had a 20-foot backyard, your first 20 feet, right, and then it would be from there, 50 feet to any new structure. So you effectively have a 70-foot separation between your back wall and any structure.
Okay, well, my house is on a cul-de-sac, so one side to the far right is only 15, my house is 15 feet from the fence. So you're saying another 50 feet? So would there be a road back there, or where, how do you,
No,
how
so
are you going to filter people in and out of that fairway?
So the road alignment will depend on the hole. So generally access is taken here. Most of them do go through the middle, the center of the hole. And generally speaking, you want to align a paseo in the front porches looking into the buffer area or close proximity to create a little pedestrian experience.
So could there be cars behind that towards my house? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
You mean a road in the buffer?
I don't know, yes. Could there be cars exiting and coming in, or?
No, there's no road proposed in the buffer in this location.
But there could be some cars backing in, or a parking lot could be back there. Is it going to be the back of the building, I guess is what I'm asking?
Yeah, the exact orientation is going to vary by hole and your precise location. So I can't really speak to that generally. It really depends on exactly where you are and exactly where the building will be.
And the last part of that, the hole is contoured, it's very high, as Kurt mentioned on his property. It's very high at that upper end. So at the 3-story is going to be how high? 38 feet?
3 stories typically vary between 30 and 40 feet. It just kind of depends on the housing type. Generally speaking, it's around 35.
And it's only about 50 feet. So there goes my question.
Okay, next, Sherry. Oh, okay, sorry. Shane, sorry.
So my house is at the connector of hole number 1 and hole number 9. Right now there's a walkway there. What are your plans to do with this space? And the second question
The library will be closing in 5 minutes.
And the area of hole number 9, I heard that the most number of units are going to go there. You're going to do movie theater, farmer's market, all kinds of things, and a road to access. And I just want to understand how, what are your actual plans to this area?
Sure, I'll be brief. Here that will remain a pedestrian pathway. The city would want us to have emergency-only access there for a fire truck. But there will be absolutely no through auto access there at any time. It will only be a pedestrian connection. With respect to unit number 9, we are thinking about and are proposing a public plaza there. So when we say a movie theater, we don't mean a commercial space. So a public plaza would be a space, I don't know, if you've ever been to many European cities have them, where people gather there, you can sit, you can hang out, you can eat. It would be a place for a movie in the park or other type of community activities, but there's no kind of commercial standing building there. We don't propose like, an In-N-Out Burger or something that you would see over here.
Okay, and how many units are proposed in this area right now?
300.
Thank you. Kay, I think we're gonna have to, we'll miss Kay Ham.
Oh, that's me.
You can either talk really fast or hold your question to the next meeting.
First of all, you said there's a master association for those undeveloped spaces. Who is going to be this association? Who will be?
So the entirety of the property would be in the new master association.
Yeah,
All
pays
units.
who pays
All the
for-
new residents.
New residents pay for their townhome or apartments and also this master.
Correct.
Wow, okay. And the second is, those open spaces are owned by you, right?
I'm sorry.
Along with this developed homes, and those undeveloped homes, open spaces also owned by you.
Yeah, in the event that we don't currently own the property, but in the event that we did purchase the property, we would also own the open
You
spaces.
own those undeveloped, developed.
Correct. Correct.
So nobody is.
Our next meeting is February